An interrogation with a ticking clock and everything on the line? I better call Kevin and tell him I won't be attending the opera. There's someone else I'd rather hear sing.
Oh, damn!
Hello, Kevin. I won't be joining you at the opera
You're
tonight.
on the phone already.
The ticket's under my name. H-O-L.
Welcome to Bottle Episodes, a podcast where we discuss very special episodes of TV shows that focus their action on a single primary location. I'm C.J.
And I'm Courtney.
And today we are discussing Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a sitcom that aired on Fox and is now on NBC. It started in 2013 and it's still running. The episode we're discussing is called The Box, which aired on April 1st, 2018. It was written by Luke Del Tredici. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And directed by Claire Scanlon. Hi, Courtney. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty great. How are you doing?
Great.
Good. Thank you for being really patient with me because I have been after you about this episode. And I just love Brooklyn Nine-Nine, okay?
I honestly didn't realize you were such a B99 stan. I know so many people who love this show. It is the ultimate comfort food show. And especially hashtag in these trying times, we need shows like this.
We really, really do. I feel like Mike Schur has three standouts in terms of like comfort food shows. There's Parks and Recreation, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and The Good Place.
Yes. And
I'm just going to say that I love Parks and Rec. I think Parks and Rec is my number one, and I think The Good Place is like a very close second. And Brooklyn Nine-Nine is my third. And when I say that, it's almost like I'm being asked to choose amongst my children. Like, I do love all three of these. This is my Mike Schur, Sophie's Choice situation. But I love all three of those shows and Brooklyn Nine-Nine lately just because it's such a fun workplace comedy. Despite the subject matter, it is still really great. It's excellent. And I've been really clinging to it these last few weeks for sure.
I'm glad we kicked off the discussion framing this show against Schur's other two shows, because that is the only way that I can conceive of this episode. I'm not as familiar with Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I've only seen this one for this podcast and also the pilot episode. Okay. And in terms of ranking them, because you and I both love a good rank.
I know you do.
I would say that Good Place is like number one for me.
Okay.
I love like the creative highs and risk taking of that show, and it's a sitcom, but it's so much more. And then Parks and Rec, very close second. I think that the comfort food aspect is strongest for me with Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
That is the show that you put on, it is. After a bad day.
I clean my house to it. Like if ever I'm like stressed out and having a bad day, it is Parks and Recreation 100%.
Right. And then this show, I really, really, really like, but there's something about it. There's a slight barrier there where I'll never really love it.
I got you. No,
I think that's okay. That's not a negative.
Yeah,
I have such respect for it. And I've only seen 2 episodes.
To be fair, you've only seen 2. Right. I will say that for me, around the time when this show started coming out, like you said, 2013, that is around the time of, real intense discussions around police brutality were starting. And I will say that for me, watching the show was really complicated for a very long time. And it took me a while. Like I did abandon the show and then I came back to it. And eventually started to like really give it a chance. And then I was like, you know what? I like this a lot more. And I've had conversations on, Facebook with former classmates who are like, how can you like this show about, that glorifies cops? And I'm like, well, in my head, I have to do a thing where I basically say it's an alternate universe. I have to say it's an alternate universe, an alternate Brooklyn, where policing is in a much better state. It's not perfect. It's not great, but it is a very aspirational alternate universe for policing, where we have a gay police chief, a gay black police chief. We have a Sergeant, who is this big, beautiful man who has all these terrifying muscles, but is really, really intense about his farmer's market experience. We have two Latina cops, two Latina detectives who are opposite personalities, like completely different from each other, and are well fleshed out and well thought out characters. I must say that the show has done a lot to try to counteract or at least address some of the things that are in the news. I'm
so curious to hear how they do that.
Yeah, well, all while being like fun and silly and making a meal out of that opening, that cold open with that trumpet blare that happens. I think they've been famous for that. So this show, this episode, The Box in particular, finds itself in a really interesting season. I think it's safe to say that we all know Mike Schur shows are always in danger of cancellation because very specific, very loyal audience, not a lot of people that are like coming to the show. And then what's ironic is, like you said, this show started on Fox and then had to be saved by NBC. And now they have this thing called like the Schurverse, where they're like, oh, here's all these shows that Mike Schur has done. And so in some way they're kind of loosely connected. And so this was a season that definitely felt like a go out on a bang season, where they're like, if this is going to be our last season, we should do our best to make it as intense and fun and good, but also heartfelt as possible.
So just for clarification, did they, this was season 5.
This is season 5.
This was the last one on Fox?
I believe it is. You know,
so they thought that they were going out.
I think that they thought that they were going to go.
Understood.
I might be wrong. I might have to clarify that. We might have to have a coda or something at the end where we clarify. But I do feel like this was definitely a season where they were feeling like, this might be our last one. So in this particular season, we have, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the show, this is the season where we have Peralta and Rosa Diaz have been convicted of a serious crime, and they went away to prison, and they came back through Holt's actions. Through Holt's, he's made a deal with a pretty terrible crime boss in order to get Rosa and Jake out of prison. And then we also have this season Peralta proposing to Amy. And then at the end of the season, we have their wedding. It's a wedding episode. So all of this happens in one season. They don't drag it out. They don't, try to like say, oh, at the beginning of next season, we'll start with the wedding. No, they waited until the end for that wedding. This is a season where we have Holt up for commissioner. He's trying to become the commissioner of the NYPD. We have this episode where Rosa Diaz comes out as bisexual, and it's a really touching and warm episode. It's the first time I've ever seen a bisexual character on television come out as bisexual, and then it's treated with as serious as it's treated as seriously as someone is. It might be treated if someone is gay or they're trans and they're going through some sort of experience. So that was really interesting to see that. And then also this season, we have a lot of connection between Holt and Peralta trying to really work through their own relationship. There's always been this ongoing joke about these two characters have a father-son relationship, and Peralta has a terrible father. The first time I've seen like an actual, I won't say senior, but like he's definitely a himbo. Like he's definitely, the dad is in his like 60s, and you're definitely like, is this guy serious? He should have gotten over this a long time ago. So it's been long established that Holt and Peralta have this father-son relationship. And both of them are kind of reticent to admit it, but by this point in the series, they're both kind of like, yeah, no, we definitely care very deeply for each other. And then for this to be such a strong ensemble show, what's really interesting is that this is an episode that doesn't have a lot of the other characters in it. We only see like quick snippets of Gina Linetti. We only see quick snippets of Boyle. It is primarily focused on the relationship between Peralta and Holt. which is really, really lovely for them to take time to explore that. So this is a really interesting. It's a really interesting season. This episode, I feel like, is in the midst of a lot of context, but it also is standalone. That's how I felt anyway. How do you feel about the episode, CJ?
Yeah, I was honestly surprised to hear that this show dealt with such epic character arcs. I mean, it's not a surprise just understanding, or being familiar with Mike Schur's other work. But when you were doling out those season-long arcs, I was like, wow, these characters went through some serious shit. And so I'm sort of recontextualizing this episode on the fly in my brain, that this is maybe more of a quieter episode in this season.
It is, yeah. It ends up being a quieter episode. Like, a few episodes away from this, they have an active shooter episode.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. No one comes into the precinct, but like one of the characters is in an active shooter situation, and it focuses on the people who are left behind and how they have to handle that.
I'm so curious to what, like, I would love, after we get off the mic, I would love for you to recommend me specific episodes that deal with like the ugly realities of the real world, because I think that is a really intriguing aspect of trying to do a cop comedy in the 2010s, 2020s. So this episode really seemed like a bit of a throwback to me, and they were leaning into that throwback. They were leaning 100%. Into Andre Braugher's roots in homicide life on the street, and we were kind of playing with light genre parody of the great interrogation scene.
Yeah, I mean he's known for it. Like, if you have Andre Braugher and you have him and you have that voice that he's using, you really have to like make a meal of it. And Andre Braugher is in such good humor about the whole thing. And I love it. I love it so much. So do we want to just give like a quick synopsis of what this episode is and what it's about?
Yes, I have prepared one.
Awesome.
Okay, so the bottle of the week is Interrogation Room C at the NYPD's 99th Precinct. In the box, Detective Jake Peralta and Captain Ray Holt team up to interrogate Philip Davidson, played by Sterling K. Brown, a cool-headed dentist and murder suspect. Jake and the captain's tactics fail to rattle the scrupulous dentist, who turns the tables on them as he sows seeds of doubt and disagreement between them. Against Holt's orders, Jake lies to Philip, saying they have a witness who puts him at the crime scene. The gambit fails, and Philip is almost set to walk. The captain chastises Jake for letting his ego drive his decision-making, inspiring Jake to break Philip by playing on his ego. Jake points out an errant piece of evidence that paints Philip's murder as impulsive and sloppy, forcing the vainglorious Philip to confess that he indeed planned the perfect murder. The sun rises as the captain congratulates Jake on a job well done. Is that fair?
That's fair. That's 100% it. You got it. Got it in one. I would watch 3 hours. I lies. I would watch 8 hours. I'd watch the whole night of them interrogating this man. I would.
I bet you there were like so many comic bits and games they must have left on the cutting room floor. I love that the second act is just games to try to rattle Philip, and of course they all fail.
They all fail.
The singing, him trying to get Philip to say the victim's name.
Yes.
In various ways. What was your favorite rattle the suspect game?
I love the, I will say, trying to get him to say the names. It's just the face, Sterling K. Brown's face as he's doing this. So good. Oh, so good. Like, so this is, of course, Sterling K. Brown at like the height of his This Is Us powers, right? Like, he is the hero of that show. People love that guy. But he has a real good knack for playing like smarmy jerks. And this character is the smarmiest of smarmy jerks. So when you see his face and he's repeating the guy's name and of course the wordplay of him incorporating the victim's name in different ways, so brilliant. I love that. But I have to say, the callback to Peralta playing the guitar and just screaming. Brilliant. I think everybody's seen that GIF on the internet. Yes. What about you? What was your favorite interrogation tactic that they attempted?
I liked when they try to rattle him by saying that a dentist is not a real doctor.
Yes. Oh my God. So good.
And that backfires. Now, so I would like some additional character backstory context with you.
Yes.
Was the captain just flustered by that because he is a PhD doctorate holder himself, or is he just like a stickler for language?
It is multiple things. So it is definitely that he is a stickler for language. There's a point at which in another episode he fires someone because they use a contraction and he doesn't like it. They make fun of him for kind of being a robot and a stickler. And this is definitely a reflection of that. I also love that he gets so heated they have to smash cut away from him. But also,
the editing is so on point with this episode, by the way.
The editing is perfection, and that's definitely something I would like you to comment on for sure. And
yes.
Then his husband is also a PhD. His husband is a PhD.
Understood.
And is similarly like robotic and hilarious. They've touched hands in public, and it was like, oh no, like they were both so weird about it, which I thought was really funny. But yeah. So tell me a little bit about the editing. What you thought of the editing in this episode?
A couple of aspects. One, and we've talked about something similar in previous episodes, but I love the way the cold open begins, where we're cross-cutting between, I'm just going to keep calling him Sterling because I keep wanting to do that.
That's fair. I had to write down the character's name because I always just want to go with Sterling.
Right. Philip Sterling, we're talking about the same guy. So when Sterling enters the precinct and we're cross-cutting between that and Jake preparing the interrogation room. Again, you and I love this in bottle episodes when we're just giving a little more time and visual space to the setting. It clues us in and lets us know, like, we're going to be spending time here, so like get ready. I love that, those table setting shots.
Have we seen as loving a preparation of a bottle before?
They've been more subtle in other episodes that we've looked at.
Okay.
Mad Men, there's like a blink and you'll miss it moment. Okay. Where Peggy kind of just like looks at the empty office space. And then in the Mad About You episode, we noted that there's just like a nice push in. Yeah. So this has been like the most notable table setting sequence. Yeah. And so I love right off the bat, we're playing with this good versus evil type of juxtaposition. And also this episode calls into question Jake's smarts. And so I know that he's sort of like, in terms of like comic archetypes, he's like the doof, right? Yeah,
he's like a goofy, fun guy. He's a guy who loves his job like a little too much. Like he's that guy, yeah.
And so I love that this episode calls into question like how smart or dumb he is. And I wonder how many Brooklyn Nine-Nine episodes actually do that, or if this episode is notable for actually, having him be a little self-aware of how he's perceived.
I think that this is one of those episodes. I think it's the first time he's very self-aware of it, like on the nose self-aware. Okay. I feel like Holt is constantly trying to get him to up his professionalism game. It's become less intensive as the episodes have worn on because you can see Holt's influence in the way that Jake conducts himself as a detective.
I love that. I love him trying to, prove himself while at the same time not letting go of who he is. And so I love that him, planting all of these little tricks just to make the interrogation room seem a little less comfortable to the suspect. It tees up the fact that he is cunning and strategic in his own Jake Peralta way.
Yeah, he loves what he does, and he's actually really good at it. It just needs polish. That's literally all this issue is. He needs
That's
polish.
Perfectly stated. He needs polish. Yeah. But more to the point, to the genius of this episode, I love how the editing really punctuates and gives space to all of these rapid fire exchanges.
Yes.
And the first instance of this is when Jake and the captain are conspiring, like getting themselves really riled up about how they're going to interrogate the suspect. And within that scene, I love that the captain is really getting excited over the notion of an interrogation, talking really soft and then talking really loud and then leaning, right? And then, they rile themselves up, and then bam, we sort of do this like really quick 10-second time jump right into the interrogation, and the editing is just it really is sublime.
Awesome,
and if we're gonna call out the editing so much, we got to give our due to the editor. And thank you, IMDb. His name is Jeremy Rubin. Thank you, Jeremy Rubin.
Great job, Jeremy. Wonderful. So good.
Another quick question for you.
Yes.
Are all of the other episodes this rapid fire, or is that specific to this episode?
It is very specific to this episode. I do think that the show likes a witty banter, enjoys wordplay. I mean, it's a Mike Schur show. So, of course, that component exists. But I will say this episode leans heavily on it because it is a bottle episode. There isn't much window dressing in terms of this episode. So what they have is language, and they really, really lean into it. And I think that is a credit to the fact that they have Andre Braugher, and it's a credit to the fact that they have Sterling K. Brown. I mean, again, I would watch round after round of those dudes just pitted against each other. They are so phenomenal. And that's not to discredit the work that, oh my God, I can't believe Andy Samberg. I always blank on Andy Samberg's name. Like, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to or what I am talking about. I never remember Andy Samberg's name. Sorry,
is it that
Andy.
You want to call him Jake in your mind? Or is it just that, like, you remember his face more than his name? Because he, like, when I think of him, I think of his face and, like, like the big goofy grin more than I think of his name. So I kind of get where you're coming from.
Like, I love him so much. He's a rubber-faced dude. Like, he can pull a face like nobody else. I see his face first. And then two, I remember, side note, when I was just starting out at my very first job, I was trying to recall his name and also not say dick in a box because I was at work and I was talking to somebody and I was like, the guy from SNL with the hair. And
I'm trying to keep this safe for work. SFW.
And my coworker completely called me out. He was like, did you just not want to say dick in a box? So
I love it. You could have gone with Lazy Sunday. You could have gone with Lonely Island. But, your mind's in the gutter, Courtney.
I went straight to Dick in the Box. But anyway, so he is, not to say that he isn't keeping up, because he is keeping up. I think that, he is number one on the call sheet, obviously. I think he's being kind of generous. And you know what? No, that's a lie. I don't think he's being kind of generous. I think he knows his place. I think he knows what is happening here. I think he is seeing that this is Andre Braugher. I think he is seeing that this is Sterling K. Brown. Again, height of his This Is Us powers. And just being like, you know what? I'm gonna keep up. I'm gonna do my best here, but these guys are the ones who are really running the show. But I do feel that they lean very heavily into the witty wordplay. I think they lean really heavily into the pace of the way that they're delivering these lines. And aside from, again, the beauty of the editing is so good. And I do think that this show has always had a fun relationship with the editing. There are several moments where I do see that the way things are staged, like there are moments where you see Sterling, Philip Sterling, literally sitting between Peralta and Holt.
Right.
You see his interrogation room, you see him sitting in there, and Peralta and Holt are having conversations on either side of that interrogation room. And then sometimes you see moments where Peralta is doing his best to give gravitas, and there's a whole conversation about how he looks kind of like a Muppet. Like, there's no way he can pull it off in the same way that Holt does. And you see literally Peralta in Holt's reflection in the interrogation room. So
you're speaking to just the visuals and the framing and how they sort of always frame Sterling so that he's just looming in the background.
Yeah, we see him looming in the background, but we also see Holt looming in the background. We see him reflected a lot in this. And it's really interesting the way they've really made that visual language evident in this episode. It's not something that they normally do, but they have the time to do it because it's a bottle episode.
True.
I love the control. I mean, the obvious control that Philip has here. Like, there's the moment where they make the decision to try the strategy of getting into his space. And it's almost like you want to tell them it's a trap. Like, don't do it.
Right.
This guy is going to pull you into his orbit and then you're screwed. Like, it's so
really
impressive.
Quick. Yeah. One of my favorite unexpected jokes in this episode, and I don't have like a strong context for the characters, like I keep saying, but I just found it hilarious that the captain didn't know who Amy Adams was.
Oh yeah, no, that's very common.
I laughed out loud, and I don't even know why I found that funny or why the writers found that funny.
It's very par for the course. Like, there's a moment where you're just like, oh, he doesn't know anything about any pop culture at all. All of his references are like Philip Sousa-esque. Like,
I see. So that's that is his game. It's that like, I'm only high culture, I'm not pop culture. Okay.
Exactly. He just has no context for it. Also, fun facts, he loves very plain foods. He, in fact, would love it if he could just eat a pellet and that would be it. Like, that's the kind of person he is, and it's so good.
But yeah, in regards to like that game or that strategy, I love the way that Philip turns the tables on them by criticizing Jake's teeth.
Yes. And
as a dentist, he has the right to do that.
As a dentist, he should do it. The fact that Peralta is the opposite of Holt, he has the issue where he is basically a child. Like, he does not, clearly doesn't brush his teeth, doesn't drink enough water. He is up to debt in his, like, an unbelievable amount of debt. Like, it's very clear he needs a lot of help and guidance, and that Holt provides that to him. I will say that this as well, it's really, really interesting how excellent a boss we see Holt is. There are moments where Peralta makes some major errors and goes against direct orders, but you see Holt automatically leap to his defense in when the situation demands it. You know, we get that random lawyer at the end. Like, there are some things that I do find to be a little bit there's some parts of this episode that I feel are not perfect. You know, and we can talk a little bit about those in a minute, but the random lawyer is one of them. But in that moment when the lawyer walks in and is kind of like, well, it looks like you've been holding my client and you've been lying to him to try to get him to confess. Holt is right there next to Peralta saying he is legally within his right to do so. Like, he's clearly not approving of him, but he doesn't hang him out to dry, which I really appreciate.
You hit on two things that I absolutely wanted to talk about, because those were the two things that struck me on the first time I watched this episode. One is Captain Holt, and two is some things are not quite perfect with this. Captain Holt, he was the character and the performance that absolutely took my attention. And I loved that this episode was so focused on, you know, our key mentor-apprentice relationship, very similar to Breaking Bad's bottle episode, Mad Men's bottle episode, and Parks and Rec's bottle episode.
Yeah, that is 100%.
So we're in very familiar territory. But since this episode was able to focus on mentor-apprentice, then I was really able to sort of like investigate it and compare it to these other iconic relationships in television. What I loved about this one is that they really nuance Holt's character so that he is more than his mentor role or his archetype role.
Yes.
I think in comparison to Ron Swanson or Jack Donaghy, those characters tend to be played very much for laughs, very much from the protagonist's point of view of this being like a very remote or mythic type dad character. And maybe this is just 5 seasons of work or the writers, you know, facility with writing these kinds of characters, but they really capitalize on the opportunity to nuance this character so that he is just as human as our main protagonist. Like, I never got the sense that he was just like this gruff teacher type. Right. You know?
Right.
You see the cogs like in his mind turning. You see him just as engaged with this interrogation and just as unsure of what to do as Jake.
Yeah.
And that made him really, really exciting to watch. I think I really want to watch more episodes. I'm almost certain that he's going to be my favorite character.
Oh yeah, no, Holt is 100%. You know, to quote the songstress, Holt is 100% that bitch. He is wonderful. It's a combination of the writing and the affection that the writers very clearly have for Holt. That not only
there's a respect there. You see that the writers and the actor and the narrative really respect this character.
Exactly. That he comes into the show already kind of a respected character. He continues to earn the respect of his employees. I don't know how to of his detectives, I guess. Yeah. So he comes in, he earns the respect of his detectives, but at the same time, he already comes in as very, very self-possessed, as very authoritative, but he works really hard to understand who each of his detectives are and what they need specifically. Like there are multiple examples of him handling each character very differently and weirdly still very much retaining who he is. There's a really wonderful video essay from, they used to be Screen Prism, now they're The Take on YouTube. And they talk about loving like a robot because that is what Ray Holt does. He is very analytical in his approach to interacting with these other characters on the show. And while that might seem cold at first, you find that he is very specific. The way his character is written, he is very specific in the way that he treats each of his detectives. And what we find with Peralta is it's very clear that he has an affection for all of his detectives, but with Peralta, he knows that Peralta needs something a little bit more than other characters. And it, for once, for me, justifies a protagonist's interaction with their mentor. Like, it makes it even clearer to me than it feels like in other shows. Like in other shows, you know, the person is getting the attention from the mentor because they're the protagonist of the show.
I see.
Whereas the show,
right? Like, why do Jack and Liz Lemon hang out so much?
Exactly. What does he see in her that makes it so necessary for him to talk to her every day? This show really makes that clear by demonstrating that he takes a different tack with each person he interacts with, but also he recognizes that Jake needs a little bit more for multiple reasons. And some of those reasons are very personal, that include the fact that he and his own father have a lot of issues. And so it's really fascinating the way the show has really, really built up this character's arcs and built up this character's mythology, even amongst his own detectives.
I did notice that there really is a loving care and attention to the characters, perhaps at the expense of plot, and that is a little related to. Did you like that segue?
Yeah, that was beautiful.
A little related to what I found a little middling about this episode.
Yeah.
And I really am just splitting hairs here because it was a really solid, enjoyable episode. For me, there was this aspect of okay, so this is, it's not necessarily a whodunit. We're fairly certain that Sterling did it. At least that's the way they frame it, right? So they're setting up this very specific puzzle, I guess, of how they're going to prove that he did it, right? That's the central question. And I thought that in terms of the plot being a puzzle, you know, a cop genre mystery, if you will, they didn't really push too hard in that direction. There was no sense of, you know, they were kind of inviting the audience to play along. You know, they drop a little bit of these clues, but in terms of being that, you know, 20-minute puzzle, it falls apart by the end.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. I do not feel like that ending is earned.
Right. Yes, correct. Because, Jake pulls out these details, in the case file. We didn't even see those details. We didn't even know those details. So it was impossible for us to play along.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then, we have this lawyer that shows up at the very end. And I'm like, what lawyer in their right mind would let this man confess like this?
The
way in which it happens is just so, like, I do like the fact that Peralta goes in there, sweeps in there, and is like, hello, I have all of this list of facts, and this is what I think. And I think the asides about how addiction is a disease, I do love that. But but at the same time, I'm like, there's no way this would have happened. Like, there's no way. Like, it's the one thing that feels very false to me.
Yeah, everything related to the lawyer felt like iffy. I watched this episode twice, and the first time, when I'm discovering not only what this episode is, what this show is, that definitely took me a second to get over that classic problem that so many crime shows have, which is that this suspect would just walk into an interrogation, and he's even told that they suspect him.
Right, exactly.
Right?
They 100% knows.
Now, you can chalk some of that up to character. Like we end up finding out or learning that Sterling does think very highly of himself. So, we could say, oh, okay, well, this dentist just thought that it would be a nice challenge, that he didn't need a lawyer. But really, the first time I was watching this episode, I was asking, where is his lawyer? Right? So that was a huge problem for me that I just had to get over. And then when she does show up, to your point, she doesn't stop him during his big, long, ranted confession. And that felt very...
She protests once.
That was a stretch.
One time. She protests one time. I'm like, you should have basically just slapped your hand over his mouth. Like, there's no other way there's no way you would have let him do this.
And to be clear, as tetelevision viewers, we are not asking for realism. We're not asking for lawyer character to do that. Yeah. We're asking for the writers to maybe acknowledge that a little more. Right. Hang a lantern on that, what have you.
Or find some way to just, I don't know, tighten it up just a little bit. Because there is a point during this episode where you start to feel the crush of time. Like, you start to feel like the episode is running out of time to solve this. And not just because they call it out and say, oh, you have 8 minutes to do this monologue or whatever. Like, there is a moment where you start to feel like Holt and Peralta are so down on their luck at this point that you don't know if they're going to be able to come back. Like, I remember watching this episode for the first time and thinking, how are they going to get out of it? Like, how? What is going to happen? What could possibly happen that would allow them to get this guy behind bars? Like, what would they have to do in order for that to happen? And I couldn't really come up with anything in that moment that would resolve at the end of this episode.
Right. And that's what I didn't like about this episode. One, I love that feeling. It's a classic feeling when you're really engaged with the story, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh my God, our heroes are painted into a corner. Like, that's great. That's what we want. Yeah. But then how they get out of that corner, that stuff should have been seeded into the story from the beginning. Right. And this script or the final edit did not do that.
Right. I 100% agree with that. And again, like you've been saying, I love this episode. I love this episode a lot, but I do not love it because of the way it resolves itself in terms of its mystery. I do like the very end when they walk out into the sunshine and they're like, oh, we're actually almost late for work. And they have this wonderful bonding moment. Mm-hmm. I think that does a lot more for the show than perhaps this moment does.
Yes. It was a really sweet tag. And, I think both of us are on the same page where clearly the writers had to prioritize one thing or another, the, character relationship and the arcs versus, some pot boiler mystery plot that we're going to forget about 5 minutes after the episode is over. And of course they chose correctly. They chose characters.
Exactly. And I will say that, I think by getting such a recognizable actor to play Philip, obviously that did some of the weight, that carries some of the weight of this.
So much of it was casting as a shorthand.
Exactly. It was so much shorthand to get us to this place of this guy is like kind of like an arrogant jerk. Even if you haven't experienced Sterling K. Brown and some of his more beautifully arrogant jerk roles, the way he's doing it, like they needed somebody who could do it and establish that pretty quickly. And I feel like he did that. I feel like the way the camera kind of slow pans up him and you get to his smug little face before he enters into the interrogation room and he's, having that moment with Gina. I feel like they really knew they had to establish that quickly and make that his foible by the end. So I can see how they were trying to get to that ending, but they didn't nail the execution. They didn't,
not
like
quite,
you said,
no.
They didn't leave enough breadcrumbs for us to get there with them.
Let's see. Anything else? Any moments that you enjoyed that you just wanted to call out, or any other insights?
I just want to reiterate that yelling about etymology moment was so jarring and beautiful that I put a little heart next to it in my notes. And I just want to say that I feel like the show has done a lot culturally. I think it's done a lot for a lot of folks who love a good ensemble workplace comedy, and for the show to demonstrate that they can pare it down. Like they don't need all of their larger than life characters. They don't even need multiple sets really. Like for them to be able to demonstrate that was really, really, really impressive. And I love this show and I love Andre Braugher, and I don't know that I will ever be up to watching Homicide: Life on the Street, but I do think that this gives me a good insight onto how that show worked, because he is amazing and I don't know why he isn't winning multiple awards every year as Holt. But I really, really love this show, and this episode definitely, I would say, 3/4 of the way is phenomenal.
All that being said, how full would this episode make your bottle?
I would say I'd give it 85%. I know that's probably maybe the lowest I've gone so far. Just because that ending, I really wanted them to stick that ending, but I do love so much about this episode, and they do accomplish so much in such a tight 21 minutes. That, I rank it very highly, and I do love this episode a lot.
Yeah, we are more on the same page than I thought we would be. Going into this, I figured, somewhere in the range of like 81%, because I really enjoyed it. But like I said earlier, I will probably only ever really just like this show.
Yeah, that's right.
But, talking it through, I do think that this show was doing a lot in terms of just really like refining, landing those jokes with the rapid fire writing and editing. And really, again, the care and attention given to the characters and their relationships in general. Obviously a forte throughout the Shuri universe. And it is just firing on all cylinders here. But, the actual story is just okay, and we've talked about that. I will say I'll dock a few points because You Can't Handle the Tooth never comes back, and that was shocking to me.
It should have. It really should. They tried to
We knew the O'Dams were coming back.
The O'Dams
They teed that up. You knew that, that is how, all roads lead to 3 O'Dams. I just knew that. But I'm like, how does You Can't Handle the Tooth never come back?
It really should have. It should have. You're absolutely right. There's a complete missed opportunity there.
But all that being said, I think I'll leave this conversation liking this episode even more than I realized. So I'll give it about 84%.
Okay. All right. Wow, that's really good. I love that. I will take it.
But I am looking forward to watching more. Truly.
Awesome.
Truly.
I will send you a list of episodes. Do not worry.
Please. All right. This has been Bottle Episodes. If you have an idea for a bottle episode from television history we should cover, or if you're trapped in a single primary location and need to send a distress call, email podcastbottleepisodes@gmail.com. That's podcastbottleepisodes@gmail.com. Say goodbye, Courtney.
Goodbye, everybody.